So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Today, very excited to introduce, sponsored by Shipware, Fed Up with FedEx and UPS rate increases, 10 negotiating tips in 20 minutes, essentially. Prior to this webinar, this is something that we've exclusively done in our forum settings, such as Parcel Forum or Home Delivery World. So we're very excited to be here in this webinar setting today. To introduce myself briefly, I'm Matt Samowski. I'm the manager here of the client success team. Prior to Shipware, I was a UPS senior account executive for 4 years based in the metro area of New York. Ultimately, I was negotiating carrier contracts between some of the largest shippers and UPS revenue management. Although I'll be providing some of my perspective from the rep side as we go through this, it's mainly going to be led by Josh Taylor, who's our Senior Director of Professional Services here at Shipware. Prior to his work at Shipware, Josh spent over 17 years at UPS, working from sales, pricing, revenue management, and strategy to global product innovation. So we're looking to give you guys a peek behind the curtains today on kind of what the interactions look like to an extent of negotiations between shippers, carriers, and even reps and revenue management internally. With that, it's really gonna be broken out into 3 sections where the first few areas of tips are gonna be pretty much solely based on preparation. Then we're going to be moving into negotiation, followed by execution. As we go through this, feel free to post any questions in the chat. We're going to get through these slides in about 20 minutes, and then there will be a 10-minute Q&A at the end where we will address the questions. Without further ado, Josh, though, I will pass it over to you for our first tip and strategy here for preparation.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And thank you all for joining us. We've got almost 70 people on right now. So it's great to see so many people interested in trying to get this right, because it really can be a difficult thing, figuring out, really what you can do to get the best rates possible from the right carriers. So the first tip here is that it takes a team, right? If you think about this from the UPS and FedEx perspective, you're usually dealing with your account executive. They have a boss and a boss and a boss all the way up, but they also have a pricing team that you really never get to talk to. And kind of the same thing applies to you. This is a really complex negotiation, and it does require a team. If you're going to be that point person, then you need a couple people in the background that the carriers either don't have easy access to or don't have access to at all. The first one would be an analyst. So this would be somebody that understands the data. And this is important because it gives you somebody to fall back on, hey, I need to go talk to my analyst because I can't answer that question for you off the top of my head, right? It doesn't benefit you usually to give away information like that if you don't really understand why they're asking you the question. And then ultimately having a decision maker, if possible, the person negotiating, it doesn't hurt to have one person above that at least have to sign off on this contract. And your carrier rep might push back against this idea, but frankly, we saw it all the time when I was in sales and pricing at UPS, where we thought we got to the end and they said, yeah, but Cindy, my CFO, has to sign off on this. And so I'll talk to her and we'll get back. We go talk to her and Cindy goes, yeah, I'm ready to sign, except this one thing needs to be changed before we do it. And of course, it was much easier to get that last change when you got right down to the end there. Also, the last bullet point, asking your rep questions can really kind of add them to your team, right? Because the pricing side of the carrier is going to ask your rep, well, why is the client asking for this discount or that discount? And if you have asked your rep for clarification, and they've passed on some information to you, they take ownership of that and they become a little bit more part of your team. So that's the first tip. Second one is to have a plan. Again, this is a very complex thing. If you, let's say you bring this up with your carrier rep out of the blue, they're going to ask some questions and then they're going to go back and start talking to their team and they're going to formulate a plan. You need to do the same thing. So what's changed since the last time you negotiated? Some of you negotiated late in 2022 and want to negotiate now again, which is fine. That happens all the time. What's changed since the last time? Or maybe it was pre-COVID the last time you talked and a lot has changed. You need to understand what you want. What do you need? What can you give up? What costs you the most money? And then which carriers do you want involved? It used to be a pretty simple equation for most people. It was, UPS, FedEx, do I have a preference? Am I willing to talk to one or both? But it's gotten so much more complex. And then also coming up with that plan of who's going to be involved in your company, if they're going to be available to the carriers to talk to, things like that. Be the partner you want. This is preparation that really you should think about all the time. The carriers usually, they're a pretty high cost part of the whole process. A lot of companies have goals for what percentage of their product costs they want to pay in their transportation costs, and it's pretty substantial. So if you can be a good partner to the carrier before you go into these negotiations, it can only help you, right? So provide good forecasts. If you're big enough that they need you to forecast, provide good forecasts. Try to stick to those. Provide easy access for the drivers so they're not spending a lot of time waiting at your dock, things like that. But also be nice to your sales rep. If they have a quarterly business review or something that they want to present to you, they're probably measured on that internally. And not only is it a chance for you to maybe learn a little bit more about how they're thinking about things, but also it helps them look good, which, just again, gets them on your side a little bit more. And whether it's the ops team or the sales team or somebody else that you're involved with, those stories do make it back to the pricing team. And that can get factored into how they look at your account, whether it's a good bet for them or a bad bet. So do what you can to make yourself a good bet.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there, Josh, is, from a rep's perspective from UPS, every package that any shipper is shipping is somehow tied to that individual's rep compensation. So the better partner they are, the more inclined the rep is also going to do to keep them happy as well as a shipper. So
yeah, that's a great point. All right, educate yourself. Make, employ, or contract an expert with an expert. This is a complex business, right? The carriers have hundreds of levers they can pull. If you think about all the surcharges and different, base charges that are associated with anything, fuel surcharges stack on top of seasonal surcharges and everything else that shows up. So you want to understand how the carriers are looking at your business. It can also help, Matt, and maybe you can talk about this a little more in a second, but can it help to understand how your salespeople make money on your account? Because that will impact the way they look at you. But also understanding how they look at your business. You have cost drivers, they have cost drivers as well. There are certain characteristics that they want. And if you listen to the earnings calls, things like that, you'll learn a lot more about what those really are. The sales reps have a talk track that they'll go through, but it doesn't always speak to what the pricing team is looking for. So, Matt, would you ever get questions like directly from your carriers, like how am I compensated? How are you compensated on my account? That type of thing.
all the time you get, and depending on the account and the rep itself, it's definitely structured differently, but no matter how you slice it, every package is going to be tied to a dollar amount of that rep's compensation. And, one thing I would say is if you're able to find these mutually beneficial opportunities with your carrier rep, when they're open, if you're open and you have an open discussion about how that works, there's going to be savings that could be had that benefits not only the shipper or the business, but also benefits the rep on the other side as well.
Yeah. We got a couple questions so far. Will the deck go out after the call? Yes, this will be archived and posted. And we'll give our contact information too. So if you have any trouble getting that, please feel free to reach out and we're happy to share it with you. The second one was if we could be more specific about the industries and characteristics that carriers tend to favor. So sure, just to briefly, if you listen to the calls, the earnings calls, you'll hear a lot about SMB, so small and medium-sized businesses, being really important to the carriers, usually because they pay a little bit more. But also things like healthcare, which has been a huge focus for UPS over the last few years. It was traditionally dominated by FedEx, but UPS has done a great job of trying to catch up there and really turning it into strength. As always, business-to-business shipments are typically more profitable for the carriers. So anything in that regard, if you have a mix there, that's better than all residential. But then there's the characteristics of the packages. If you're shipping pillows that are really light and large, the carriers aren't going to look on that as favorably as something that's small and compact. If you're shipping really large stuff that requires additional handling or oversized or large package surcharges, then those are harder for the carriers to justify too, because they slow down the network and they make the other packages around them more expensive. Now, that's not to say that just because you don't have the ideal characteristics that your stuff is undesirable. You just need to understand that the carriers are going to look for a way to offset some of that additional cost on their end. And you need to be strategic and understanding about where you get those discounts, which we'll get to in a little bit. Also, just real quick, we can go back to that previous slide. It is not an interesting read to sit down and go through the rate and service guides. But if you're going to be the one doing the negotiation, I highly recommend that you read it at least once. There's so much information in there. And despite the fact that they're like 140 pages long, half of those are just rate charts that don't take any time. It really is worth it to understand what the carriers are really looking at and what their options are. And then benchmark if possible. Now, knowing your needs and options, this is more, again, about what you need internally. The carriers are going to come back with a whole list of things that they say is important, right? They're going to have claims about time and transit performance or on-time delivery performance that they're going to use to try and justify a higher price. Even something as difficult to quantify as reputation might factor into the offer that they give you. So understanding what really provides value for you and your customers is very important coming into these negotiations, because what the carrier tells you may not actually be your reality. We saw this all the time. And in fact, we used it to our advantage. We would, ask people, well, okay, yes, the other carrier says they're faster here, but have you actually done any A/B testing to see if it really was important to your client? So take the opportunity to do that ahead of time. Know if you can split your business, and understand where the market is right now. For example, the UPS and Teamsters issue, if they don't have a contract negotiated by August, there could be some disruptions. Not saying there will be. That's a whole different discussion that we could spend hours on. That's really interesting. But what's happening as a result is that people are looking for alternatives, and regional carriers, things like that, they're forecasting that their networks are going to be spoken for as early as April. So you need to understand how those things could impact you, even if the strike never happens. This is the last one on the preparation. Retain and use your leverage. Obviously, 6 out of 10 are on the preparation side, so this is very important. They need to know that you know your options. If you come into this thinking, I've always been a FedEx house and I'm always going to be a FedEx house, FedEx doesn't have a whole lot of reason to, really give you the best possible pricing out there. They know that you're willing to take a hometown discount. So you need to know for yourself if you can switch and what the criteria would be that would justify that switch. Now, don't necessarily share that with them, because that gives them additional insight that the pricing team and your rep are going to use to, try and build a more convincing case for you. So again, it's not the worst thing that they understand and try and build that around you and meet your needs, but it's not necessarily something that you need to share. Matt, as a sales rep, did you have a pretty good understanding of most of your clients, where they stood with something like this, if they were somebody that would switch versus not?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I actually made my own, internal tracking system when that came time. If somebody was threatening either going out or coming back to FedEx, UPS, vice versa, kind of what that risk factor was based on previous conversations I've had. Are they a FedEx house? Are they a UPS house? To the extent where when I submitted for pricing agreements or modifications, that was actually something that got asked through the system. Is this an at-risk account if they don't get this pricing improvement, or they continue to be a UPS or FedEx client? So definitely relevant.
Thank you. I know we said questions at the end, but this makes sense to answer in line here. Question is, would you recommend being straightforward with carriers about their win rate and other volume percentages? So whoever asked that question, if I turn out to not understand exactly what you're saying, please type another one. But I assume what you mean there is their win rate, like if you're dual sourcing with to carriers, being honest with them about how much of that volume they're actually winning. It doesn't hurt to be honest with them about things like that. You don't have to tell them the extent, by which they're winning or losing. Making them guess there can be valuable because they might offer you more savings than they need to necessarily win in like a pure rate shop situation. But letting them know that the opportunity is out there and helping them to quantify that opportunity can really make a difference, especially on the UPS side. UPS puts a lot of effort into getting those cost models right and understanding really what's going on at your account. So the more that you can do to help them understand, especially the beneficial sides of your business that they may not be winning, the better chance you have at getting back that best possible offer. All right, so let's move more into the negotiation side. Now, this next slide, we've got 8 things on here. Some of you are going to look at it and go, yeah, I've got that, of course. But there's going to be other people on the call who look at that and might not even know that it's an option to ask for discounts on these things. So I guarantee you every single one of these things is out there. The important thing to consider is the context in which you get them, which really is the next slide here. That you can't focus so much on one specific discount that you lose track of its relative value to the rest of the negotiation. It's really easy to have an emotional attachment to one thing if you really, really just, ticked off about all the additional handling charges you're paying. And you know what, you're probably right. You're probably paying too much for that. But let's go to the next slide, Matt. If you fixate on that one charge, then you lose an opportunity for flexibility that might actually allow you to save more money in the end. So this is where understanding your business starts to really become important. Target a savings amount, not a specific discount. And there are exceptions to this. If you have certain product lines that require a specific discount, it's going to be hard to get around that. But there are so many different aspects of each package that get charged. If you can save, $2 in one place versus $1 in another, go for the $2. It sounds easy on paper, but like I said, there's emotional value tied up in that. Some charges appear, to really bother certain people, and it's hard to get around sometimes. But at the end of the day, you really just want that savings number at the very bottom of your balance sheet to be as high as it possibly can. So the analogy is a balloon, right? If you just poke the balloon, it's going to expand on the other side of the balloon. Whereas if you actually let some air out, the balloon will get smaller and you pay less. That's what you need to focus on. Another reason why it can help to have more people involved there, so one person doesn't get fixated on the value of something at the expense of something else. All right, so as you're going through that, just a little bit of insight here that, having carrier pricing and carrier sales separated is a real thing, and they don't always share all the information back and forth between the two groups. Personally, I remember trying to help my clients when I was in sales quantify the value of the offer that I was putting in front of them. And then I remember a couple of years later going into pricing and realizing how much I had misunderstood the offer that I was putting in front of my clients. And I felt bad about it, but I was trying my best to help them understand. I just didn't understand yet everything that was coming through. So it's not that your carrier rep is lying to you or trying to cover something up or give you bad information. They are probably doing their best to give you all the information that they can. And they want to manage their information skillfully and tell you the important things, but slow down, take some time, ask a lot of questions. Tell me what exactly has changed in this offer is a great place to start if they bring you something new. And just keep asking, is that all? Is there more? Make them tell you at the end, no, that is everything. I've gone over everything with you. Also, ensure that they're using a good sample for your shipments. They'll often grab a couple of months and make their decisions based on those couple of months, even if they have years of data available to them. So if you ask that question and they say that they're using a couple months that may be over or understating your value, or maybe just don't represent a recent change, then it's absolutely fair to ask them to go back and reconsider that. The third bullet point here is incredibly important. Don't assume that the answer that you get from them is 100% right. You need the ability to do your own calculations, and you need to do them because the answers can often be very, very different. And bring up any differences. Try and understand what's different about their model versus yours. If you've misunderstood something, that's fine. Figure it out. Ask all those questions. Read all the contract language and ask for clarification. I can't stress how important it is to ask those questions. And again, this is another opportunity or another example of how having multiple people on your side involved becomes really beneficial. Because you can fall back on having to explain something to your CEO. You can play stupid a little bit and be like, I still don't understand how this works. My CEO is going to ask me to explain it to him. I need you to help me know that I know it well enough that I can answer his questions. Or if it gets to something and they're telling you, well, no, the value definitely is this, being able to say, well, I need to go back and talk to my person in finance and make sure that they agree with you. You don't have to know in the moment the answer to those questions, and it's better to create a little separation, get it right, and then come back.
Josh, we used to joke at UPS that it was tougher to negotiate internally with our own company than it was to negotiate with the customers, to your exact point, with the real disconnect between sales and revenue management.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Your carrier rep is telling a story internally. And their story, is to the best of their understanding. Anything you can do to help that story be as accurate as possible or be as beneficial as possible. I'm not saying to lie, because if you give them bad information, they will come back and make changes, but help them understand exactly why your stuff is desirable. And then finally, once you think you've gotten it all straightened out and they've promised that they're going to come back with the offer, you really don't have the offer until you have the whole thing in writing. And in writing means it's an executable document, one that you could actually sign and they could sign and would go into place. It doesn't count as being in writing if it's just rate charts or PowerPoint presentations or email promises. The carriers don't recognize those as an actual document. They won't necessarily respect them if you come back and say, well, my carrier rep told me that I was going to get 50% off of additional handling. The pricing team will say, that's nice, they didn't have the authority to tell you that, you don't have it. So make sure that you have the whole offer in writing, read it through. There can often be clauses in there that can change the value of things that seem very, very clear otherwise. Things like clauses that will take away rate caps if inflation is too high, or that require you to stay with one carrier or another for a certain amount of time, or to pay really punitive fees otherwise. So understand everything that's in there, get the whole thing in writing, otherwise you don't understand exactly what the offer is. So again, just a reminder, ask for clarification at every step of the way. Stupid questions can have an enormous value. Ask, and get them on your side, help them understand what you have going for you so that they can tell that story internally. All right, so that was a pretty quick thing with the questions. We're now at 24 minutes.
Yep.
We have a few more questions here, but please, if anybody that has anything, start typing now, and we'll answer as many as we can. Otherwise, we will, like I said, we have our contact information. We might have to go back to the first slide, Matt, but send Matt or me an email or call us up and let us know.
Yeah. So Josh, as I'm going, and I'll navigate us back to the first slide here, but we do have one question in here. As a small business, what would the best thing be to focus on in order to get the best pricing? We're not at a stage where we have a team of negotiators. We don't have the volume compared to the bigger companies. What is our value proposition to convince the carrier to give us the best rates possible?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we all start somewhere, right? I can't remember how many accounts would try and say to us in pricing, well, we could be the next Amazon if you would just give us the same rates as Amazon. And while there's a certain amount of truth to that, Amazon didn't start out as Amazon either. So for a small business, focusing on what you do best and helping your carrier understand your prospects of growth is going to be a huge part of getting those incentives. So if they see you as a business that has some good opportunity, you're somebody they can invest in through their incentives. I mean, it can very literally be considered an investment because they are accepting less money from you to carry the same package as somebody else. So if anything you can do to make it easier on them, whether it's, hey, we're located in a business park next to a bunch of other bigger companies, and so it's the cost that you have to stop at my business is relatively low. That's something you can leverage. If your client, the people that buy your products, are primarily in urban and suburban locations, even if they are residential, that's easier, that's cheaper for the carriers to deliver. If you do a good job of packaging and you have a low incidence of damages, that's another thing. There's so many ways that the cost can increase for the carrier. Anything you can do to keep those costs down are going to help them understand why they should give you better rates. So if you're a very simple account to service, if you don't have a lot of issues, if you're close to other businesses, if you deliver to commercial locations or urban or suburban destinations, all those things can come into play. But even if you're out in the middle of nowhere, relative to everybody else around you, you might be a pretty big account. You might only spend $100,000, $50,000. But if you're the biggest shipper in your 300-person town, the fact that they can come to your town and pick up those packages at the same time as they're having to deliver everything else in your town makes all of those deliveries cheaper. So any way that you can kind of help them understand how your business helps make other businesses cheaper, aggregate deliveries, aggregate pickups, it's going to come into play.
So Josh, we have a lot of questions here that poured in, and I'll just say to the call, we're definitely not going to be able to address all of them, but I do have anybody on the call that is posting a question that doesn't get answered. Feel free to reach out to myself directly on here. I have my email posted, and I'd be happy to either address them over email or set up a call to discuss. But one or two more before we finish up here that I think are relevant, especially this time of year right now. One of them is, what advice would you have to a specific larger retailers that have seen their shipping costs skyrocket, specifically as a result due to the new seasonal surcharges? How do carriers really see us with this surcharge? How can we position ourselves better to get some of those increases back in 2023?
Yeah, that's going to be a very common question across the board for anybody that is getting those. With UPS now charging the demand residential surcharge all year, despite demand for their packages being lower than it was last year, it's hard to understand how those charges are justified. I recommend dealing with that head on with your rep. Talk to them about, hey, despite the fact that our packages seem to get cheaper because we were paying, say, $6.50 for additional handling peak surcharge until January 15th or 16th or whatever it was, and now we're paying $3.50. It looks like our rates went down, but really we're paying $3.50 more than we should here. So first of all, don't shy away from bringing it up, and try and bring it up in the context of everything else that's gone up. Your rate increase has gone up, the fuel surcharge is up. Not all of those things are actually the result of the carrier's costs increasing. Fuel surcharge is a great example of that. You're paying for much more fuel today than you were 2 years ago. Even though the price of fuel is higher, you're paying physically for more fuel per package. So anything you can do to put it in that context of, hey, look, you're collecting surcharges A, B, C, D, much more than you ever were, and I'm asking you for a discount on C in particular. It helps to kind of contextualize your request, also to let them know that you understand what's going on with your account. If you don't understand what's going on with your account, the carriers can tend to take advantage of that over time. So anything you can do to quantify the impact, talk to them about what's going on within your company, and how it might force you to make different decisions is going to help the carrier understand the consequences of not giving you those discounts. So that's where it comes back to, really, they need to believe that you could and will make a different decision on how you route these packages if they don't change something.
Yeah.
So
Josh, I think the last quick question we'll be able to answer live today is, why is this continuing to get more complex every year? I just want a straightforward agreement. I know you and I chat about this all the time. Josh has a slogan that he likes to use of, it's complexity by design with the carriers, and that's really the answer to that. They want this to be complex because the more complex it is, the harder it is to understand, and the more people that they continue to get to pay these increased charges or seasonal surcharges, et cetera. If everybody understood it, more people would definitely be pushing back against it.
Right. So anything you can do to increase your understanding and communicate that back to them is great. Also, there are so many more options today than there were even 2 years ago that you really should consider. If you're not looking at regional carriers or some of these, new models, or the price or the postal aggregators, whether the consolidators or expediters, there's some really great, really fast and effective options out there, not called UPS or FedEx, that are really worth investigating. So I highly recommend that you do that. Whether you end up going with them or not, they might open your eyes to a brand new world as far as, how far you can get one day on ground, how little you can actually pay for residential deliveries. There are great options out there that your carrier reps are really hoping you don't bring up to them.
Absolutely. So Josh, it looks like we're 2 minutes over our time here. So feel free to reach out, like I said, to everybody on the call, either on the link initially or to us directly. We'd be happy to address any of these questions that we didn't get to today. But Josh, thank you. And if you have any closing comments, feel free.
Just thanks again, everybody, for giving us time. I know this was very fast. But yeah, Matt and I are interested in your questions, whether you're a client of ours or not. We are grateful for you being on the call here and happy to answer those for you. So thanks again for attending.
Great. Thanks, everyone.